So today we're going to talk about a book that when I first read it, I honestly was bored to death. I was reading it in the afternoons and I kept falling asleep while reading it. But then I came back to it in preparation for this episode and I started reading in the mornings, and I think that was a better experience for me. But as I read it, I really got to see that it is a pretty powerful book. It's not a book that has a lot of action in it, of course, but it's a book about home, about being with family, about growing up, and all these other things. So why do we do Little House in the Big Woods where we do it in the second grade? What is the significance of this book, even just practically?
It's the first big chapter book that they have. So it is nice that it is a simpler story. But this is really the point. We've started out with, as we've talked about previously, Animal Folktales, and then Prairie School, and then Sarah Noble, which is their first chapter book, really. That's not an I can read book where they have to use a bookmark.
Right.
But it's simpler. And this is a huge book to a second grader.
It is. It's big for me.
It is. And it takes them a good chunk of the year to get through it, chapter by chapter, because as we do everything, we really immerse them in it. But it really is, we are really no longer into phonics heavily. I mean, we still have some pre-phonics work in this, but it's very minimal because this is the book that's going to launch us toward a literature program that's going to take them through the 12th grade.
Right.
So this really, I feel like, is a rite of passage book for the students, where now they're going to be like little adult readers. And so it is good that it's a simple story. It's a story about children their age. And so in addition to it just being big to trudge through, as you thought in the afternoons, it's doable to them. And there's going to be a sense of satisfaction to finish this book.
Right.
And also, not to underestimate just the formatting of this book. I mean, the words are big on a page, and there are pictures throughout. And so I think that in that way, it is a little more manageable, just merely because of the formatting of this book. So it does feel like a sense of accomplishment, but it was published in a way that makes it accessible to a young reader, I think.
And I think this book is one of those that when I read it again the second time, with a view to theme, thinking about it thematically, I did see some themes pop up that we're going to explore, like you said, the rest of our literary career here at Memoria Press. And so the first one that I want to talk about, and it's really kind of two themes in one, is related to the title itself, Little House in the Big Woods. So when you read this book, you get a lot about what makes a house and what makes a house a home and what makes a house safe and secure in the midst of something like the big woods, that dangerous kind of other place. So can we talk about that? What are you guys seeing about home, about house, about danger, about the woods?
Well, I think something important to point out here about home for this young reader is that they are seeing things in very tangible ways. And so this is what we strive to do with the literature is have the student think about the themes and think about, the meaning and what a book is teaching the student. But in this book, we have a very nice bridge about building a home. And so the student can actually think about the very physical, tangible parts about a home before they're thinking about some of the more metaphysical ideas about home that we're going to be talking about later. So this is a very nice bridge for the student to talk about exactly how did Paul make this home? I mean, he had to go into a clearing and chop down the trees, and then it's specifically gives the details of how he built this house. And so I think just even transitioning the student from thinking in very practical, tangible ways to more metaphysical, thematic ways is important in this book. It's a nice bridge.
And it also shows what a primitive home would have been compared to what we've got now, which really leads us on. This home in early America, what kind of windows would they have had? And we just were rereading Adam of the Road, where in the Middle Ages in England, they carried their panes of glass with them, the nobility, and would put it in each castle that they came to. It's just a totally different, but it all leads to that real thought about what is a physical house.
And how difficult it was to produce. I think that this book is great because of the detail that she includes on exactly how do you collect honey, exactly how are they making cheese, exactly how is Paul building this house. And so the detail that the author provides here is really something that, if discussed in a certain way, can really breed a sense of gratitude. I mean, it can show us the things that we really take for granted and how much effort goes into, building a home or having syrup. So these sorts of things, the detail, I think, is this book is a great little history for students. It makes me think so much of my father-in-law, and he teaches me how to plant a garden every single year, and it's a highlight of my spring. But I have written down the notes exactly as he tells them to me, because the experience, even though I could buy a gardening book and even though I could, watch YouTube videos or whatever, but hearing his words about exactly how he plants a garden from experience is valuable to me, because it's carrying on traditions that I think that we can miss, just the relational part of our interaction with our home and our land and our families. And I feel like that's what Little House in the Big Woods does a little bit. It feels like, a grandfather or a father-in-law or someone just telling you exactly how this happened. And I like the tone of that.
Yeah, I think when I was reading this again, just seeing that world. I mean, it truly is almost a foreign world to us, because I can go to a market and get whatever I need for groceries, whatever. There are little hobbies that I have. I love to fish, and I'm beginning to learn how to do that well and learn about fish themselves. But there's so much practical wisdom that these people had to have that I don't have to have. I can go to a YouTube video and learn a little bit, but then I may not ever put that into practice. But these people had to know how, you said, make cheese, which required a lot of work. They had to know when to take advantage of finding honey in a tree and going and taking all their gear to get all the honey that they could. And so there's so much practical wisdom in here. But one of the other things that I like about this home, this theme of home, is how it's protection, how it's safety, security. So as I was reading it, I was paying attention to how in the winter they're protecting the home by putting out, I believe it was rock and grass and other things to keep the house warm, but also how Father had his rifle in the house, and that lent security to Laura, as she knows that as long as he's here, as long as he knows how to operate that thing, we're safe. So what kind of safety, security did you see throughout this book?
It reminded me of The Courage of Sarah Noble. I think this is a theme that our students will have already been through several times.
Sure, that's right.
And, the danger that can be associated with the outside world and how home provides a security from wild animals. But at the same time, they were very compassionate toward the animals. They recognized that they were living, that they had placed their home in the
big woods.
Yes, literally in the place where these animals actually owned it first. And they were very, I think this book does a great job of being really respectful of that and acknowledging, Laura was always concerned about her father shooting the deer. So is it okay? I mean, we're either going to have meat to eat or the animals are going to live. That's a huge thing to think about that students may not have thought about.
Well, there's a section where he's talking about seeing, a doe with her fawn.
Right.
And Laura
says
him,
you wouldn't shoot.
And he says, of course not.
It's
it's not the time to do that yet. We've got to let them grow.
That's
and
right.
get to the point
because
where
you can't even take the mother, because then you're going to.
That's right. If you want this cycle of
child.
Life to continue, you have to steward that.
To come up with all of that, to know when it's okay to shoot a deer.
That's right.
But to know that he has to shoot a deer, even though he is looking, at one point he sees one and forgets to shoot it.
That's right, because it's beautiful to him.
Yes. Yeah. So I do think that they are merged with nature in a way that we are, very few of us are these days.
That's right.
Actually, they are living in, their home is with nature in a way that we don't. A lot of people do. You know, who live on farms have a better experience of that than city.
That's right.
City people do. But, you know, their baths once a week, playing in the snow, but also, you know, we're going to see in Farmer Boy, the snow also has, you know, it's got a purpose too. The honey from bees, the community working together and trading work, that, you know, that's happened still in my lifetime living in rural Kentucky with when tobacco was the crop.
That's right. Yeah.
And everybody had to work together to help each other because of the timing of it. That, you know, that still is happening some places. I think the being at home, one of my favorite lines in the book was they were cozy and comfortable in their little house made of logs with the snow drifted around it and the wind crying because it could not get in by the fire. Just that feeling of seclusion and of being wrapped in safety and warmth and comfort. And this wasn't. I would have probably frozen to death in this home. I get so cold, and I think, you know, they didn't have electricity, so it wasn't well lit. They were using a fire for heat, so it wasn't well heated. But they make it sound so cozy.
That's
and
right.
comfortable.
You almost wish you were
right,
there.
Right.
Yeah.
It really does show a very stark contrast between home and outside home, and even things that are good outside of the home. But once you're home, there are certain comforts and expectations there. And so I think that one of my favorite sentences is in this book, going back a little bit to your fear theme, is when Paul is walking home and he hits the stump instead,
he thinks
it's a bear. Yes, and so they're having a conversation about that, and Paul said, "Well, you know, I had to because I would never make it home if I ran away from everything that I feared."
That's right.
And so I think that's a really, I mean, we can think about that in a real sort of spiritual, metaphysical way, but it's also a great lesson for the child to think about. You know, when we're outside of home, there are going to be threats, there are going to be dangers, and we, you know, hopefully home is a place that we are striving to get to, and that we are, you know, willing to make that journey home to. And so I just love that sentence.
Even going to town was scary for Laura.
Right.
To actually go into a town. They'd never been to a town before. But it ends with how wonderful it is to be home.
Yeah.
When she finally she enjoyed town, you know, once she got over her fear. It was exciting to be there, but to get home was just, it's like when you go on vacation and you're having a really great time on vacation, but there's just something about getting home.
So I think that's a good question. What does make this a special home? Like, why do you think? What are the attributes of this home that you think make it the home that we all sort of want to cozy into?
Exactly. I think it's what we've talked about. I think it's that coziness, that protection from the elements, but also from the wildlife, security of over and over again. Laura talks about being like secure in her father's arms, even, that there's a safety and security there. So home is more than just the building. It's also the presence of the parents.
It's the family.
Right.
But one little detail that I picked up that I really liked was that a home like this, even in the middle of nowhere, still needs to be adorned. It needs to be beautified. And so there's a section around Christmas time where Pa is making Ma a shelf.
Right.
And you think, of course, this is one of the few places where you've got something that is useless, if you will. There's not a physical need for a shelf because she puts her China doll on it. She puts her doll on there. And yet that is important because it beautified the home. It adorned it. It made it welcoming in a way that just a blank, harsh wall would not have.
I think the gifting is an important part of this book. But also, one of the things that I thought was important was the elevation of manners, the expectations, and the courtesy to each other. And one of the things that made the home probably comfortable and warm is that there was just a high expectation that everyone treat each other well.
Yes.
Laura was reprimanded for quarreling or for being competitive with her sister, and Sundays were held in very high regard, and they had to keep the Sabbath. And so I think that sort of order of the home and the relationship between the freedom and joy of a home, but also the responsibility of every member in the home to keep the family's culture. I think that was something that I thought was played out well in this story. Was everybody had a part to play, everybody knew their expectations, and when everything worked in order, there was a lot of joy and comfort and appreciation for the family.
That's right.
Everybody did have their own role. And if somebody didn't fulfill that role, it wouldn't be like a home with antagonism. It would be a home that didn't have everything it needed
That's
to
right.
sustain life.
It wouldn't survive.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is one thing I think that farm families have, is that it's not just we need to respect each other, but it's we've got to work together in order to sustain our lifestyle.
Even if you're a child.
And we're
even the children had to do what they needed to do.
Yes, they had to do their part. And Ma and Pa, I thought it was really interesting in here that Ma and Pa each, and it's the same thing in Farmer Boy we're going to see next year, is they had their roles. And each one was not more important than the other. Right. You know, Ma's were more inside, Pa's were more outside, but they were still essential. Having candles was essential. Taking the food that Pa provided and salting it and making it so it would sustain them through the winter was essential. So they were true partners, and the children had to be partners with them. So it wasn't just about a loving family, but it was really about survival also. But they did it in such a joyful way.
Such a grateful way. You know, they would just very subtle little compliments. Ma would say, well, you know, we wouldn't have to worry about starving like the man in the story with the whey, because Pa is such a good provider
That's
for
right.
us.
Yeah.
And, you know, Pa would give little compliments to Ma, and
give her gifts. I mean,
right.
make her buy some cloth
That's right. That's right.
for an apron.
That's right. Right, exactly. Just little extra things, and just that thoughtfulness for the children when he would come home and bring them a treat, or Ma would let them have a little maple syrup candy before it was. That's right. Before it was time, and so those just little thoughtful gestures. It's so minor, but I think that contributes so much just to a spirit of love and kindness in the home.
And I think that this is similar to the manners, but there's so much. Ma and Pa do so much instructing throughout this book. There's so many little, they're not proverbs, they're never kind of stated proverbially, but it is that there are these maxims or these statements that they give. And so part of the way they develop that partnership is through the instruction of their children, through saying, Laura, you must never interrupt, because she tries to interrupt a story at the very beginning. Or when he's cleaning out his rifle, he's talking about how, or maybe he doesn't say it, but the book tells you he had to use boiling hot water so the water would evaporate. That's instruction. That's teaching you, if you do this, you have to do this right. Otherwise, it won't work. And so I like the theme of home throughout this. And I like the way that the community of the home is brought together through manners, through instruction. And you see the economy of the home. I mean, you're never going to necessarily say to a second grader, this is economy. But it is, it is helpful to think about you have a position in a place. And if your chain is broken, it breaks the whole chain. The economy falls apart. So how do we talk about this with kids? How do we relate this to the second grader's life?
I think this book, because it is written from Laura's perspective, actually does a very good job of that. I just, when you said something about manners, I remembered when they were having a meal. I can't remember if this was the dance. It may have been the dance. These chapters are really long.
They are long.
And they were having the feast, and the children all watched anxiously while Grandma ladled out the syrup. And then Laura says, perhaps there would not be enough. Then somebody would have to be unselfish and polite. That she knew the expectation, but they were really anxious. Is somebody going to have to be unselfish? And yet
Grandma made exactly enough.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's a good point. That's right. Well, and the fact that they all did contribute and do what was expected of them, did give them the leisure time to have the dance.
That's
you
right.
know, so I
That's
mean,
right.
the fact that everything was, as you said, sort of an economy and everything was ordered so properly, they were able to, add, a lot of enjoyment to their days.
Oh, they had all those oral. This is full of oral stories and traditions.
I wanted to talk about those. So yes, let's do that.
That I think are just great. I made a little list of them. I mean, there were a bunch of them.
Yes.
Stories that not just like, I mean, I've listed Yankee Doodle, Jack Frost, The Rock of Ages, Pop Goes the Weasel, Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, but Buffalo Gals. But there were also stories that belonged to their family.
That's right.
That were being passed on orally. Stories about like the one with Grandpa and the Panther.
That's right.
That would be just continued generation after generation to be passed on, which are so important. I do think the oral stories and traditions are important. And I think that we need to point that out to students every time one of those comes up in here that, what's happening here.
Yeah.
Do you have stories that you know about your parents or your grandparents that you want to pass on to your own children? That then brings the family across generation to generation.
What you're learning in that circumstance is that story itself is instruction. Story is what teaches you. Story, better than anything else, tells you how you ought to live. And I think those stories are crucial to this narrative because they're always for a point. They're always to tell if like Grandpa never went back out into the big woods without a gun, without a rifle, after the Panther. Or, Pa himself had to learn obedience because he was foolish in the woods and got scared.
Right.
But yeah, I think showing that to students is probably even appropriate at a second grade level. Look how story tells you what to do. It helps you out.
I was just going to say, what do we do now? We say, go read.
That's
we
right.
give our children a book. Do we sit around the fire and tell stories?
Yeah.
No,
I think that's
rarely.
I think that's a great point that yes, maybe our storytelling shouldn't always be books. Maybe it ought to be oral in nature.
Well, and another point about stories, I think, and I think that this is helpful in preparing our students for the very high quality literature to come, is that this is a very entertaining story for the child, and it's very instructive, but it's not sensational, and it's not an action story.
That's
and
right.
There's not a lot of high drama. It's a very mild-mannered, steady, routine sort of description of daily life, but there's so much to learn in this. So, for instance, the boy who cries wolf, and at the end of the story, Father Charlie, I believe, and Father says, "Well, he was he's a little liar," and Laura says, I don't understand why Paul called him a liar. He didn't explicitly lie. But and the answer's not given. But this child reader has to have a moment to think about that.
Yes.
And they have to
That's right.
they have to come to the conclusion that crying wolf and seeking help when you don't need it is a way of lying. And that is a disservice to those around you. And it's a disservice to yourself, because when you do need help, people won't believe you, right? It's a matter of honesty. And so I think that this is, it's important to appreciate just sort of the simplicity and the mildness of that story in developing students who appreciate quality literature, that we don't need a lot of splash, that we don't need a lot of action, we don't need high drama, is that there's a lot to learn from, a wise writer and from the routine details of daily life.
Yes, and I think this book has a real appreciation for that, and a real appreciation for living in the present. And they are, I found the part where they come home from town after she's been afraid, and she says, Pa sings softly with baby Carrie sleeping in Ma's arms, and they're home from town, and he sings, "Mid pleasures and palaces, though we may roam, be it ever so humble, there's no place like home." And then there's just so much, like I think it was the dance at Grandpa's, when the whole house smelled good with the sweet and spicy smells. All of these descriptions could be, this is like 2 paragraphs of descriptions about what the house felt like, what it smelled like her recollection as a child of that time. That is so, if students would just really slow down, and I was really bad about this as a child, these paragraphs would have,
oh yeah,
I would have wanted to move on.
Put me to sleep, yeah.
But if we read these out loud and really talk about just imagine that you're there and this, what it feels like, what it smells like, what it sounds like, just to hopefully give students an appreciation for the simple things of the present.
And a child is naturally attracted to that. I mean, this really is a strong parallel to the way we approach classical education, which is first things first. We don't have to do these splashy end things. I mean, the child is probably very scared when they think that there's a bear, in Paul's path. I mean, so we underestimate what is exciting to the child.
Right.
And we underestimate,
yes.
that this is a big story, and there is adventure in this for the child, because we live in this world where everything is just so exaggerated and over the top. And so if we can let the child be the child, then they will continue through this literature and hopefully become, students who appreciate quality literature, because they can appreciate what is, childlike in all of these books and have the patience and the development that is appropriate to their childlike wonder as they go.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, as you were talking, I realized we're saturated with adventure. All of our movies are adventurous. They're and to some extent, that's great. I love a good adventure movie. I love the spectacle of an action movie. But we're saturated with that, and we have grown to be dissatisfied with simple narrative. And yet, even when I pick up a book like The Lord of the Rings, which I hope these kids will go on and read, it's a journey. That is the thing. It's a simple journey. It's from the Shire to Mordor and back. And back
that's
again.
Not that simple.
It is not that simple.
But it's a lot of marching. It's a lot of walking. It's
exactly.
a lot of paying attention to the nature. And
Yeah.
so if you cannot develop an appreciation for those journeys and those details, then you cannot appreciate a book like Lord of the Rings. I totally agree with that.
Are you at the end?
I am at the end.
The very
because
end sums it up.
The last paragraph, she thought to herself, this is now.
This is now.
She was glad that the cozy house and Pa and Ma and the firelight and the music were now. They could not be forgotten, she thought, because now is now. It can never be a long time ago. I mean, that is presence.
Beautiful.
Being present.
Yes.
And
present
to me,
in your life.
That's right. It's a perfect recapitulation of the entire book. I love good endings to good books. I love the last sentence of A Tale of Two Cities. I love the last sentence of The Great Gatsby, where you're just struck by the whole theme is summarized by this last sentence. And she does the same thing here and pointing that out to students. And I think that's to wrap up the discussion of home and what we do with this, we point them to this, is go home and appreciate your home.
Right now.
Be present.
Right now. Right now.